Good morning and welcome to the Point. After Governor Rick Snyder testified in Washington and released his action plan for Flint, but before the first investigation into the Flint water crisis was released, he sat down with us to talk about what's happening there now. Governor, let's start with your appearance in Washington before the Oversight Committee. Before you left, I asked you, with due respect, why were you going to do that? Because it was pretty easy to script how that was going to go, and that's pretty much how it went. So now that you've been, you sat, you listened to their questions and criticisms, was that a good move?
Well, I think it was an important part of the process in some ways, Rick, because I want to cooperate with all the investigations. Just as I've told people, I started my own independent task force 2 or 3 weeks after I learned of the issue that people want to know, and at all different levels. So I want people to have the opportunity to go through that process. I wish I would have had more opportunity to give more complete answers and such in a number of cases, but it's part of that process because I want people doing that work so I can focus in on problem solving. Because I think it's important we get the record set, but at the same time, I was proud I announced a 75-point plan to go help Flint today.
Let's talk about that plan, because this deals with short-term, mid-term, long-term, as best you can figure the long-term, because I suspect that's a little nebulous for anybody to figure out what we're going to need 5-10 years down the road. But tell me about the plan from the perspective of what you hope it accomplishes.
Yeah, it's to deal with, as you said, short-term, intermediate, long-term, and it's based on programs. And that's where we came up with the $232 million budget request in many respects. Because again, I don't believe in spending money. It's like we step back to say, let's do some homework on what programs we need to help with water and water infrastructure, physical and emotional well-being to help particularly kids under 6 or all kids, nutrition issues, the whole issue of the water bill credit. And we actually create a significant reserve fund, Rick, because if you look at the bottom of the 75 points, it actually mentions this is a living document and may have some modifications. But I think it's a big step forward to make it more tangible for the people of Flint and for Michigan citizens to say, here are a number of things for Flint, but there's also some things to help all our state. We need a more stringent rule on lead for all of Michigan.
Well, you've talked about going beyond the federal lead and copper rule, which you call dumb and dangerous in Washington.
It absolutely is, too.
And so what would that look like, or have you formulated that yet?
Well, that's something I'll be separately announcing, but I'm previewing that in many respects to let people know we need to do a better job on the whole topic of how often we sample, how many samples, what's the consequence if you find a high lead. And currently, you get a letter in the mail 30 days after you were one of the sample sites, regardless of your lead level. If you have a really high lead levels, shouldn't someone be coming out to help you do something? That's an illustration. Talking about this whole lead service line, do we have a program to get rid of those lead service lines over time? There's a whole series of things, Rick, that this rule really is dumb and dangerous, and I think people are going to recognize that this is a much more prevalent problem than what any of us thought before.
Let's go back to Flint, the circumstances surrounding how this came to be. There are people who blame the emergency manager law or rule in this state. There are people who clearly blame the way the process was handled, that they don't think people were paying attention, and I think you've even said that there were long-term bureaucrats that perhaps weren't paying as close of attention as they should have. Regardless of how this developed and what whoever wants to pin the root cause, are you to a point where you're moving, do you think you're moving past this in terms of, with the people of the state of Michigan, forget for a moment the people of Flint, it's going to take a long time to get them to ever trust government again, I suspect. But I watched you speaking to a large crowd. You got a warm reception, good reception from folks in there. What are you finding statewide about your perception as you move further along this process?
Yeah, again, I think people are paying attention to all the investigations. But in particular, I think there's an even higher level of interest, in many cases, even with many people in Flint, about what are you doing about it? What's the solutions? And that's where this action plan will be very helpful. We've been doing a lot already, though. If you look at that list, a number of these activities have been completed already. Beyond that, though, I think people do want to hear other important issues in Michigan. And again, that's where this was important to emphasize. For example, the Flint water issue is part of our infrastructure problem, and we have statewide. On education, I talked about one of the things we're going to be doing in Flint is more Great Start, the early childhood program. Well, we need to do that across Michigan. So many of these things are comparable, and I think it's important that people of Michigan want to hear about the entire state too.
And I want to talk about those things that you talked about, but one more thing about Flint that struck me. I took some time and drove around the city just because I wanted to get the ability to kind of wrap my mind around what you were dealing with. There are miles, square miles of area that are not served by any type of a grocery store. There's no access to fresh produce or fresh anything for that matter. Are those things that the state can cooperate with, that they can help with? I mean, I realize it's private business, but on the other hand, it is, I think they call it a food desert, and there certainly is one in Flint.
Yeah, we've actually started working on that. We've actually worked with the Food Bank of Eastern Michigan, great organization, on doing mobile food banks. And so we've had these going out in the neighborhoods already, going to churches, other organizations, and setting up there. Because one of the things you can help with people exposed to higher lead is nutrition. Things in iron, calcium, and vitamin C can be very helpful. So again, it's how do you get more vegetables out? And then how do you show people how to prepare them? The other part, though, is we are working on the grocery store issue to some degree. Again, we don't necessarily do traditional incentives for grocery stores, but a couple cases in Detroit. Look at Meijer's expansion to Detroit. That's been a huge success, I think, both from a company point of view, but from the citizens. So where it can be important economic development, and there's an opportunity for that, I hope, in Flint.
When you look at where you are today, there is, on one hand, Flint, and I know that you are in Flint on a regular basis, and I know that you spend a lot of time dealing with it. On the other hand, there's 2+ years of your time in office, and when you and I talked on Mackinac Island, you talked to me about the urgency that you felt because there were still so many things that you want to get done. Speak first to the difficulty of doing that with Flint as a backdrop, and then let's talk a little bit about what you talked to the Economic Club about, because you still have quite an agenda out there. But how much of your focus necessarily is going to have to remain on Flint, and how will that impact doing something?
Yeah, well, I'm going to continue to have an ongoing concern about Flint because I want to solve that problem. But they're not mutually exclusive, Rick. And that's where my talk today was about how I want to create these 3 commissions: infrastructure, education, and 21st century economy. And there's a huge overlap of these issues. And again, the illustrations would be, just as we finish roads, and that took 2 or 3 years, this water and sewer issue is a crisis in Flint, but it's a big problem in all of Michigan. And don't we need to come up with a better answer for water and sewer infrastructure and other infrastructure across Michigan? So that's that commission. Education, same thing. I mentioned Great Start about early childhood opportunities. That's something that everyone benefits from. And so that's something that we've done dramatic improvement in the state, but let's solidify that. Same with pre-3 reading. So many of these programs, Flint can be the pilot or things that can be helpful there, but they're very extensible and they should be extended to Michiganders across the board.
When you talk about infrastructure that goes underground, Representative Mashoka said he's served on the drain board in the past, so he understands the process and he understands the problems, but he said accurately so, he goes, it's not very sexy. You don't hear people talking about underground infrastructure. But you're not just talking about underground infrastructure, you're talking about things like broadband, you're talking about things like pipelines, which would be underground as well, or in some cases underwater. You're talking about this really big suite of things that need to be addressed. But this is billions of dollars in the state of Michigan alone, I would guess.
Yeah, it won't get done while I'm in office. I recognize that, but we can be the catalyst, we can do the vision and the strategy to put that in place, and it's long overdue. If you stop and look at it, I use the story of roads. How many years did it take to get roads done? It was about 3 years. That was clearly infrastructure, and it took 3 years when you hit a pothole every day. When you don't have that pothole to hit, we were just ignoring the rest of this infrastructure. Let's be smart enough to recognize that was a warning signal. Flint's clearly a tragic situation. Let's not, have those opportunities go by the board to say, let's be smart enough to recognize we need to do more in areas, but across all of Michigan to improve our infrastructure.
When you talk about education, you talk about prenatal for a lifetime of learning, but particularly in regards to the 3rd grade reading levels, which for some people are a little controversial because there could be a process in which a student is not moved forward. But talk to me about your approach to reading, because as somebody who has 2 younger children, I've watched with considerable interest their ability to, as you say, learn to read and then read to learn, and that becomes a very interesting process to watch.
Yeah, and Rick, you brought up one of the major challenge points, because a lot of times people will get caught up in 3rd grade about this promotion issue. That's why I don't call it third grade reading. I try to be very careful and call it pre-3 reading. Because the point is you don't wait to third grade to sort of start this process. And the way I view it is if you start in preschool and are working all this, that should be a non-issue, shouldn't it? Largely by third grade. If you've had a chance to work on this and do interventions through all those years, hopefully promotion is not, the major question on the table if you've been working this for 3-4 years at least.
Got time for 2 more questions. I want to come back to Flint. Every day you get up, and every day you know you're going to come talk to reporters like me and hundreds around the state. And I've observed that you get the same questions time and time again. People have a lot of questions about this. Are you to a point where you think people are starting to either hear what it is you're saying, identify with your point of view, or is this going to be a divisive issue that defines your time in office from now for the next 2.5 years?
Well, I think as we really show problem solving working, particularly in Flint, Detroit education, these big issues like we have in Detroit, for example. I hope people appreciate that. Again, I never wanted the Flint situation to happen. That was a tragic disaster. But let's work through that, and we're best as Michiganders when we work together. That's the unique part. Too often in America, we have angry people that are divisive. Our opportunity to make Michigan continuing to be a great state and even greater is to say we can overcome that and work together.
When I first met you, you talked about reinventing the state of Michigan. You talked about relentless positive action. You talked about not taking credit, not laying blame. There were all kinds of things that you want to do, and depending on the dashboard, to use your term, that you look at, unemployment, total job participation, a number of those things, you can see success. But if that first day, when you and I met, you would have known how this was going to play out with Flint, your testimony in Washington, the protesters outside, would you have still run for governor?
Yeah, because I view it as a chance to help people. And too often we have people that are politicians, and they weren't looking to reinvent our state. We'd lost a whole decade, Rick. I did this because, again, I was fortunate enough in life with support of my family to say, here's potentially, I call it 10 years, 2 years running, 8 years of your life to go help people you love, the people of Michigan. And I'm proud of many of the things, Flint, you can't be proud of. That's part of life. I just have to live with it. But I'm going to keep on working hard every day to continue to reinvent Michigan and be as positive as possible. Keep up relentless positive action.
As a program note, Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley will be one of our guests on next week's program. And we're back with U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow next to the Point. Welcome back to The Point. U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow sat down with us to talk about Flint and her efforts there, plus that big Supreme Court nomination. Let's talk about Flint a little bit, and let's focus on the efforts to make it better. We know the investigations are going on, and whatever comes of those comes of those. But I know you've been focused on trying to figure out how to get the water cleaned up, how to get services to folks. Tell me about your efforts and where you think we are.
Well, right now, I mean, this is another full-time job, trying to address all of this. First, the water has got to be fixed. Service lines to homes, many of them have been damaged because the corrosion control to protect the pipes was not done. Senator Peters and I have been working for the last couple of months developing a bipartisan proposal that would give water infrastructure money to Flint, as well as help other communities across the country, certainly who aren't in the same situation as Flint, but have serious concerns. Lead's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. We thought by now we would have this passed by the Senate. The rules of the Senate allow one member to hold things up, and the senator from Utah, Senator Mike Lee, put what's called a hold on the bill. We've spent the last month trying to negotiate with him in a way that he would lift his hold and not frankly hold children who are poisoned with lead poisoning in Flint hostage for other things that he wants to do with his own agenda. We've not been successful, so now we are looking for other ways to get this done. Senator Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma, the Republican chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, has been terrific. He reached out to me to say, I want to partner with you to be able to help people in Flint as well as address other water infrastructure issues. So I'm confident we can get this done. It's taken way too long because people still are using bottled water to shower and bathe their babies and try to cook. So the water is one thing. The second thing is the health issues and nutrition issues for people who've been exposed. There are about 9,000 children under the age of 6 who have lead exposure. Some coming from homes that have lead levels higher than a toxic waste dump. So imagine, our kids, our grandkids, and how we would feel about that. So there are a number of things that we've been able to do federally because the president called for, created a federal emergency designation. So using my agriculture hat on, agriculture and nutrition, we've been able to activate areas of the Farm Bill to bring in more nutritious foods for pregnant moms and babies and get more fruits and vegetables into the schools, be able to address a number of issues, including our wonderful agriculture community in Michigan has been bringing in donations, the Michigan milk producers and the fruit and vegetable growers and others to try to help address nutrition. Then there's health. The most significant thing that we've been able to achieve right now for children and young people is to get Medicaid expansion, health care expanded for every young person up to the age of 21 who has been in the city of Flint exposed to the water, low-income and middle-income children, and pregnant moms. And this is not only physical but mental health services. We're talking about children who are potentially going to have special ed needs, who are going to have growth issues, a whole variety of attention deficit issues and so on. This is poison. And so the health piece is the other piece that I've been very, very active in and have really led the effort to be able to get health care expanded for those children.
You talk about mental health services. We were talking just before we went on about your grandkids, about my kids. I mean, if they had been exposed, can you imagine the stress for the parents, the families, and the association? But I want to talk about the nutrition point for a moment, because I don't think you can put a fine enough point on that. There are areas of the city of Flint, maybe fully half of that city, that is a food desert. There are no grocery stores.
That's
People can only buy from the local party store, and there are no fresh vegetables there. So the nutrition component is important just because it should be there anyway. But in terms of fighting exposure to lead, good nutrition can really be an antidote to some degree.
Absolutely. And one of the other things, Rick, that I'm doing is activating a part of the Farm Bill that deals with food deserts and financing of grocery stores. And I've been working with pastors in the community who've put together proposals to bring a grocery store to North Flint where it's needed, because that's exactly what's got to happen. We have to have food infrastructure. In the meantime, Hurley Hospital and Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha, who is really one of the heroes, who called out the folks at the state and said, here's lead levels of children. And of course, initially they attacked her and then finally acknowledged what was happening. But they have a health center that's right next to the farmers market in Flint. And so we've got the farmers market, the health center, and Hurley Hospital facilities. And they're actually giving prescriptions for fruits and vegetables now when children are getting their checkups and so on, and they're testing them for lead. We're using efforts that we set up through the Farm Bill to actually leverage food assistance and help people be able to get nutritious food. So there's a whole range of things creatively that we are using to be able to help people get more nutritious food.
We want to move on because we've got so much to talk about, but I just want to talk a quick note. You talked about the food infrastructure, and that is about actually physically getting the food there. But I was driving around in that area a few weeks ago, and there are any number of what were grocery stores, big ones, that could be reopened in pretty short order. So, I mean, the facility is there if you can get the right people that are interested in that kind of investment.
And you know what, if I might just one other thing, and that is if folks listening were saying, well, why is nutrition such a big issue? Lead stays in your body forever. ever. It goes from your blood to your bones. If you are pregnant, it goes from your bones to the fetus. It's frightening. The only thing that mitigates those effects is good nutrition. So that's why for children, it's really important they get extra calcium and iron and vitamins and so on. It's the only thing that mitigates against the lead, and that's why this is so important.
And the closest to fresh, the less processed, the better off, the
Yes.
more of that nutrient.
Yep.
Okay. One of the most important things from my perspective that you are tasked to do as a United States Senator is to cast a vote for a Supreme Court nominee. Now, that vote, yes or no, can be very important. And other things you do have long-lasting impact, but a Supreme Court justice could be 3 decades down the road still making very important decisions. And so as this opportunity comes with the unfortunate passing of Justice Scalia, there is that opportunity for you to take a vote or maybe not.
Right.
So in the Senate, what's your take on what's going to happen with the president's nominee? Because it has been lost on no one. We're right in the middle of an election year.
Right. Well, we're in the middle of an election year, but the president has a 4-year term, and the members that are up for re-election aren't saying, well, we don't have the right to vote all year because it's the last year before we're up for re-election. I mean, this is an incredibly unfortunate thing, I think, particularly because this issue was interjected just hours after Justice Scalia passed away. The family, rather than our focusing on respect for him and his family and so on, it immediately went to politics, which I think was really terrible. But here we are. So the President of the United States, under the Constitution, doesn't say maybe, it must give, create a nomination, must nominate somebody. And then it's up to us to meet with the person, hold hearings, and vote. And we can vote yes or no. But right now, what's being suggested is that the highest court in the land not be able to fully function for over a year. Over a year. That's irresponsible in my judgment. I mean, we need to do our job. The Senate needs to do its job, and that is replace the vacancy. I mean, no one knows when there's going to be a vacancy. This happened unexpectedly. Okay, fine. But now there's a vacancy. And by the way, an eminently qualified judge who's been almost 20 years on the U.S. Court of Appeals in D.C. He's the chief judge. He's somebody who was elected with 76 members, 76 to 23 in the United States Senate. Members of both parties overwhelmingly voted to put him in his current position. He's a highly respected judge. And at the moment, most of my Republican colleagues say they won't even meet with him. And the chair of the committee says he won't hold a hearing to hear from him and that there won't be a vote. So, this is not the way the founders of the Constitution expected things to work, and it's certainly not what the Constitution tells us is our job.
I appreciate the fact that you and Mitch McConnell probably don't sit down and discuss these things on a regular basis, but try to explain to me the optics, the politics of this, because if they truly do not want to approve an appointee from President Obama, they being the Republican majority in the Senate, the mechanism is there for them to go through the process, have the hearings, and vote no.
Right. No, that's why this makes no sense to me. I mean, it really, whoever was advising Senator McConnell made a huge mistake. First of all, in coming out immediately. I mean, was it an hour, 2 hours after the passing? And said, well, we're not even going to fill the vacancy. And then secondly, putting his caucus in a situation now where folks are being told not to even meet with the president's nominee, and that there won't be hearings and there won't be a vote. I mean, the truth of the matter is there's no obligation to support the president's nominee. That's fine. If the majority wants to hold hearings and vote and say, no, we don't want this person, send us another one. Okay, that's fine. That's doing your job. But saying we aren't even going to acknowledge we have a role and we're going to leave the highest court in the land without the ability to fully function for over a year. I mean, we'd be talking well past the next inaugural, the next president, before that person would then put a name in, and who knows how long it would be. And there you sit with the highest court in the land, unable to function. I really do believe it's irresponsible.
Our thanks to Senator Stabenow, and we're back with a final thought next. To the point. We continue to talk about what happens here in the state, what happens to Flint, what about the state school board, and of course there is a presidential election going on too. All of that every Sunday morning right here when you join us at 10 o'clock for To the Point.